there is a pretty severe split raging within the European Union amongst different EU member states, different governments, and I'm not convinced it's getting much of an airing on UK mainstream media TV. Let me know if you think I'm wrong on that, if you've seen coverage of this anywhere. But after I did the video on Hungary and Poland vetoing the EU's budget, it seems to me that the split is getting even worse. And of course, this goes on in the context of the Brexit negotiations, with the transition period finishing at the end of this year. Before I get into this, guys, before I bring you all the very latest, please hit the subscribe button and the bell and give this video a big thumbs up. And of course, you can support my work by hitting the join button down below, as I give you real news that I don't think you're being given elsewhere on this story. This really is a very big story indeed in terms of EU politics. Now, as we know, as I've talked about before, Poland and Hungary vetoed the EU budget. And what's interesting now, that what's emerging, is that far from being isolated, you've now had Slovenia, the Slovenian Prime Minister, coming out and backing the Hungarian and Polish veto. This is what Slovenian Prime Minister Janez Janša, hope I got that right, said on Wednesday, backing the criticisms, and this is a report from Euractiv, backing the criticisms made by Poland and Hungary when they vetoed the EU budget over plans to tie funding to respect for the rule of law. Some political groups, he's quoted as saying, are openly threatening to use the instrument wrongly called rule of law in order to discipline individual EU member states through a majority vote, Janša said in a letter to EU Council President Charles Michel, published in local media. As we know, on Monday, Hungary and Poland vetoed the EU's long-term budget and coronavirus rescue package worth 1.8 trillion euros over their opposition to a proposed rule of law mechanism. Now, while Slovenia did not join them in vetoing the budget on Monday, Janša said in the letter that it would not be appropriate for a political body to adjudicate in disputes over the rule of law. He said that the rule of law means that disputes are decided by an independent court and not by a political majority in any other institution. Going on to say we need EU institutions that will not be involved in member states' internal political conflict. Well, the fact is, if you're inside the European Union, it's clear that the centralisation of EU power, as we know, is unabashed, is unashamedly growing. It's a complete power grab, and that is why you're seeing now this element of financial control brought into the governance of countries, and why you're seeing the likes of Hungary and the likes of Poland push back against this. Of course, ultimately, if you really want to run your country without this sort of interference, you've got to leave, and that's why I expect others to join the UK in the years to come. But just to show you the feelings in the one of the countries, at least in Poland, because of course I'm sure if the BBC did a package on this, they would, we'd get the usual slurs of far right and bonkers and all this sort of stuff that they paint out some of these governments as being, elected by the people of their country after all. Reuters and Yahoo with this report: Polish Parliament approves Warsaw's stance on EU budget. Poland's lower house of Parliament on Thursday voted in favour of a resolution proposed by the Prime Minister supporting Warsaw's decision to veto the EU's budget and recovery fund plans. The resolution was passed with 236 votes in favour, 209 against and 1 abstention. So just to give you an idea there you've got the Polish Parliament approving the veto of the EU budget. I don't know. I think that's a pretty big development. I think this is a pretty big story. The Times, though, with an interesting report. Hungary and Poland threaten to split woke EU over budget. Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, has accused some countries, including France, Germany and the Netherlands, of turning long-standing rule of law debates into a political and ideological weapon. In our view, tying economic and financial questions to political debates would be a grave mistake, one that would undermine Europe's unity, he said yesterday, warning that the EU would use financial means to blackmail countries which oppose migration. The splits here are pretty severe. This isn't stuff that's being dealt with in a day, and there's signs of the likes of Hungary and Poland backing down instantly. These are pretty fundamental splits, fundamental arguments going on within the EU right now. As DW in Germany report, EU leaders clash over Hungary and Poland budget veto. EU leaders have made no headway on the veto of its budget and coronavirus bailout package. Poland and Hungary have blocked the passage over stipulations. Now, what DW reporting is that European Union leaders argued at a summit on Thursday over Poland and Hungary's attempt to block the passage of the EU budget. Now, it's understood that the Hungarian side and the Polish side reaffirmed their position at the video conference, and leaders agreed to park the dispute and hand it over to experts to find a way forward. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the blocs meant we have to continue talking with Hungary and Poland. There is a consensus on the EU budget, but not on the rule of law mechanism, she told journalists. The Chancellor has also said to not want to speculate as to how the issue with Budapest and Warsaw would be resolved. Now, I'm going to get onto it in a bit. There's actually some suggestion that Hungary and Poland could be frozen out of this completely. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But Merkel described it as a very serious problem and said Germany would look at all available options. We're still at the beginning here. When asked if one of those options would be to threaten the two countries with taking away their voting rights, Merkel said, "For me, the word threat in this context is not a word at all. We have a duty to try and find a way." Here's an interesting part of this. France and the Netherlands have suggested a long-shot plan of pushing ahead with an intergovernmental recovery plan that excludes the holdouts, i.e. excludes Poland and Hungary. EU sources have said the option is on the table, but it's premature and technically complex. In France, the European Affairs Minister, Clément Beaune, warned that if Poland and Hungary stick to their positions, all other member states could try and find a way forward without the pair. I mean, talk about a split. As a last resort, he's quoted as saying, "We would look at ways to go ahead without the countries who block, as Europe can't be held hostage by a certain number of governments who don't want to move forward." Meanwhile, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said that leaving two countries behind to do something with 24, 25 nations would be the nuclear option, but that is not a part of the discussion now. But you can see where this is all heading. France 24, in their report, saying EU talks fail to break budget deadlock after Poland and Hungary veto, talking about work being handed over to veteran power broker Angela Merkel and likely to push it towards another summit next month, only weeks before the new 7-year budget is to come into force on the 1st of January. Merkel quoted saying, "We have a duty to try and find a way," but adding that even though time was pressing, we are still very much at the beginning. Now, as the Express report, von der Leyen appearing to plead with Hungary and Poland as the over this EU split. So this is a pretty major story. This is going on right now. And of course it does have an impact because this is the EU that the UK is negotiating with. They can't get their budget through. They're having arguments about how it's going to operate. There's even talk now of just excluding governments and countries out of the whole thing altogether. And the context, of course, is that this is the EU we are negotiating with. I think this is a pretty major story. Let me know what you think about this, guys. Let me know what you think this says about the EU, what possible impact you think this could have on the Brexit negotiations. Very keen to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this report, if you found it helpful and informative, please hit the thumbs up button. That really helps me out. And become a supporter. Hit the join button down below to become a supporter. Really appreciate that. And of course, as ever, thank you so much for watching.